Welcome back to the Hammer Time Rackets podcast. I am Peter Cipriano, your host. Here with me today is former world champion and Rackets legend, Willie Surtees. Willie, say hello. And we are going to be doing a long form interview today. We really appreciate Willie coming on the pod. And I think we can get started. Before I start asking all about your history in the game of rackets, Willie, there's one question I think that everyone wanted to know about you, and that is, where did the high sock style come from, and what prompted you to wear the high socks that you were wearing in all of your photographs?
All schoolboy rackets in the 1960s, when I went to rugby in 1961, all schoolboy matches, you were required to wear long white trousers. And I'm not sure exactly which year it was, but maybe 63 or 64. I went and watched Charles Swallow play a match in a World Championship match against Jeffrey Atkins. And Charles Swallow, who'd been a Carthusian, was wearing long white socks. And I thought, it made a lot of sense in terms of being cool and easier to run around in, and they look pretty good. So I started wearing long white socks from that point on. Peter Gray, who was the professional at rugby, who when I was there, always thought that long white trousers were more elegant in the game, the way the game was played. It also protected your leg from a ball. If you got a ball, it would hit your trousers before harming your leg. But I'm not sure that was a good rationale. Anyway, I just thought they were more attractive, so I always wore them.
I think
from that time on.
Someone's got to bring that look back. So you started talking about rugby. Obviously, we were aware that you started rugby, and I read in an article about you that your family's history, I guess, goes back to the 1700s, having gone to rugby. Were any of your family members prior to you rackets players, or were you the first of the Surtees?
No, I think I was the first. I had two elder brothers. I'm now 70. One of them still alive, who is about to be 86. But when they were at rugby, they were born before the war. My father was in Washington during the war, so he didn't had me when he got back. When they were at rugby, there was not much money around. There wasn't a lot of rackets, and it was really just after the war. So they might have played, but they didn't play rackets. And so the answer to your question is no. My father didn't play rackets, and actually, I think I had a relative, I believe A.A. Surtees, who played rugby football for England back in the 1870s. But that's as close as they came to being athletes.
And you were a rugby player, a lawn tennis player as well at rugby in Oxford. Is that correct? You got blues in tennis.
I played. I was actually captain of the rugby 15, and tennis. Yes, tennis was my first real sort of love. I mean, I grew up playing tennis and a bit of golf, and actually, interestingly. At my prep school, Lambrook, where I was from 56 to 61, they had a rugby fives court, which I always think was an enormous asset to me inherently teaching me footwork, because rugby fives played without a racket, and it's somewhat of a dead bounce off the floor. If you want to hit a ball on your left side, you have to put your right leg across your left leg. And vice versa on the other side. It inherently teaches you footwork. So and plus the fact I played tennis. And strange enough, I came to rackets. I went to rugby in the summer term of 1961. And although I'd played cricket at prep school, I preferred tennis. I was better at tennis than I was at cricket. And I immediately got involved with the tennis, and I liked the tennis master at rugby, and that was my first term. I didn't make the tennis six, but I was practicing one evening because there was a wall, actually the side of the original rackets course. There were two rackets courts at rugby. The new court, which was the new court, I think, was built in 1860, but the old court was from the 1820s. And I was hitting a tennis ball, lawn tennis ball, against the outside of the wall, and a man was standing there watching me. And it turned out it was Peter Gray, the rackets professional, and he said, "Look, have you ever seen rackets?" Or I said, "No, sir, I never have." So he took me into the rackets court, that right then and there, and hit a few balls at me, and that's how it started. Of course, it was not played during the summer term, but at the beginning of the winter term, every boy who joined the school in the last year was required, A, to try out for the choir, and which I was very easily not chosen for, and B, to play rackets. And I was Peter Gray suggested to my housemaster that I be allowed to play rackets. In those days, you had to get permission. My housemaster had to call my father and say, Peter Gray, the rackets professional, has suggested that your son would be good if he played, would be good at rackets, or enjoy it if he played. Would you allow him to play? The reason for that being that rackets, the school fees were probably approximately, I should think, £200 a year, and a racket was considered very expensive at just under £4, £3.15, I think. And but you might go through 2 or 3 a term in the winter, so it might be 5 or 6 rackets, which added quite a significant proportion to the school fees. So you had to get permission, which indeed he did. Of course, the equipment was slightly different in those days. The racket was much more brittle. This was before the rackets had any lamination in them, the metal that ran through the frame. And on a cold day, it was perfect. It happened now and again. A brand new racket, not particularly tightly strung, but a brand new racket, if you caught it at 10 o'clock or 2 o'clock with a hard shot on the frame, would snap, just like that. And of course, they would all rackets being made purely out of wood with no lamination used to warp. So you always put them in a frame, and there were big school frames in the pro shop that everybody put their rackets in. After playing, you didn't take them back to your house because you wanted to keep them from warping, and sometimes you played for practice with rackets that clearly were beginning to warp, but because of the cost, you didn't ask for a new racket. So they tried to keep the cost down. Of course, the gut was cat gut, and Peter Gray, being at that age, he must have been probably in his 60s, and he was at his peak. He was never a champion, but he was at his peak during the war years, so was never actually a champion. Although the Gray family had a history of rackets champions, but he always believed, having grown up with the kid leather ball, hand-sewn kid leather ball, that you shouldn't string a racket too tightly. You wanted to be able to feel the ball on the string, especially when you were serving. He said the essence of the game is not hitting it as hard as you can, but hitting it to a length and hitting it with cut. Of course, that has changed like all games. I mean, that the principles have changed radically over the years with the vast improvement in brackets themselves, B, the ball, which actually which was started in the early 1950s, and was what we played with. I never played with the kid leather hand-sewn ball, although I still actually have a few. I got hold of a few later in life, and I have them, and I've got probably 6 or 8 of them. They're not as consistent and they're lighter than the ball with the polythene center, which we all use, or is used nowadays. And the game, of course, has become a game of pure speed and hitting. But he believed that the racket shouldn't be strung as tight as you could string them, because it was more important to get a feel of the ball. So it was in a sense quite a different game in those days. It was changing, it was evolving when I was at school. That I think I'm right in saying that rackets became laminated when I was at rugby. I can't tell you the exact date, but it was the beginning of the next era, and so on from then. And yeah, sorry, I'm banging on. That's another question.
Very interesting. Several of my questions were going to be about the equipment that you were using. So it's interesting to hear that the leather sewn balls were never actually in play. That was actually a different than what I had read and heard. So when you were actually playing in the late 60s and early 70s and as a world champion, you were actually using a somewhat modern version of the racket. Is that correct?
Yes, it was laminated by then.
And were you using a nylon string or a catgut string?
Nylon, but it was. I don't know again the exact date, but I would say by the time. Yes, but I obviously played when I was at Oxford. I can't remember whether it was gut or not. It may have still have been gut, but by the time I came to America, it was changed to nylon, or very soon thereafter.
And was there like a dramatic difference in the speed of play when the nylon and the reinforced rackets were introduced right away? Do you think, or did that take time?
Yes, yeah. I actually always liked to have my rackets more tightly strung than Peter Gray used to recommend, because I like to hit the ball hard. But certainly, when the rackets were laminated with nylon, with the nylon gut, the string, yes, it became a faster game. And that, of course, is when a lot of the old courts really begun to fall into disrepair. The sidewall where you hit the ball into the sidewall, both forehand and backhand, and of course that patch just above the service line, were where they were all beginning to break down. And there was, and when I, not so much in the school when I was at school, because it wasn't true when I was at rugby, and actually we didn't have a court at Oxford, we played at Radley, and I didn't play a huge amount of rackets. But by the time I got to America, when I was traveling around and seeing all the different clubs, which maybe I could talk about later, the difference of all the different clubs in America, they were all beginning to have problems with the wall and the and it was true of virtually every court that had a lot of play on it, and of course the local builders in all the cities in America said, "Oh, I can build the strongest concrete. I'll put some in there. No one will knock this down." Of course, they all got patched and lasted about a year, and then got knocked down again, until they rediscovered. Actually, they never actually. I think I'm right in saying someone like Howard Angus, who's nowadays they've done a lot of research on it and really found or have come very close to the old Bickley formula.
Yeah.
The Bickley formula died out, I think, in the Second World War, because of course there weren't many rackets courts being built, and nobody bothered to archive the formula. But now they do have a formula for making almost a Bickley-like surface.
Yeah.
And I suppose the only court that I remember, which I opened actually, was the Hailing Island court. Howard Angus and myself played an exhibition match, and the Danbys were the Danbys, of course, were rackets players, but the father, there was Paul was the son, but the father was a builder, and builders knew best, right?
Right.
how to build a rackets court, and actually they built a legitimate rackets court, but the walls were too rough. The side walls were too rough. They grabbed the ball. And as you know, the essence of rackets actually is it's a game played up and down the court.
Yeah.
The closer it stays to the side wall, the better the game is. I mean, although at doubles you hit it into the side wall, obviously as part of a tactic, but in a singles game in particular, the purity of a good singles is hitting the ball up and down the court. The court at Hayling Island didn't afford that. When the ball was forever rather like hitting the tambour of tennis, and jumping out at you. So we said to the Danbys, Howard and myself said, look, all you've got to do is just put a commercial sander on it, sand the walls down. Of course, they never did. And I'm not sure rackets is played there anymore, actually.
I haven't heard of that being the case. Yeah, I haven't heard of any rackets being played on Hayling Island.
Right, which is sad to see any rackets court fall into disrepair or non-use.
I think they changed it into a badminton court or something like that, maybe.
Yes, I believe that's right. Well, that's true. When I came to the States, the reason I went to Chicago is I got a job, but I got a job because I wanted to live in Chicago, because that's where Jeffrey Atkins was living, and he's exactly 20 years older than me. I'm going to be 74 in June, and I think he's already just been 94. But so he was 20 years older than me. I was 23 in 1970, and he was ending his career, although still playing. And I played with him incessantly. I lived at the Racket Club in Dearborn and Schiller. It was a wonderful, wonderful club, and of which I'm still a member, I'm glad to say. And I played a lot of rackets with him, as I did squash with him too, actually, and a bit of lawn tennis. He was a consummate athlete. A beautiful footwork mover, and had every stroke, and a wonderful eye-hand coordination. I learned a lot, which is what I intended to do, to learn from him. And actually, so I arrived in Chicago October 1970, and played in all the tournaments that winter. And I did beat him, I think, first in New York in the spring of 1971. I think first in the Open, and then in the amateur back in Chicago. And he at that point realized that actually he was changing jobs. He had been working for Armour, and he started out his own company, what's called Instant Bacon. It was a sort of bacon, fried bacon company. But he was giving up rackets and resigned his title. That's how I came about to end up playing Howard Angus, because Howard Angus played, I think, Martin Smith, for the right to be the challenger from the English side of the Atlantic, and I had won the right by beating Jeffrey, the right to be the challenger from the American side. So that's how the first World Championship came about in 1972. At that point, there were two rackets courts in the Racket Club in Chicago, although only one was really in good stead. The other was a perfectly good rackets court and had essentially been, to a large extent, unused, but it had very poor lighting. That has now changed. There are now two very good rackets courts there. But I obviously started to play in all the different clubs in North America. And the game over here is a very different game than it is, not a different game, it's a different group of people that play it, because in England, essentially, there are, I think maybe 13 or 14 schools that now have rackets courts, and they produce a lot of rackets players. But quite frankly, unless you live and become a member of Queen's or live and become a member of the Manchester Racket Club, there's a limited amount of rackets that you're going to play after you leave school or university. So you have a lot of unless you're very good or good enough to play in all in the amateur competitions or the open competitions for that matter. Whereas in this country, there are no schools with rackets courts, so they have Americans have an enormous disadvantage learning the game at the very earliest, 18, 19, 20, or that's maybe not quite as true now, because I think they do start a little younger, but not in any kind of formal setting like a schoolboy setting in England. So the Americans, who there's a huge group of people here in all these clubs, and they come and go. The clubs thrive and have good times and bad times, but there's an enormous amount of enthusiasm for rackets, although a lot of them are nothing like as good as of a world level standard. But that never bothered me. I mean, I used to practice with them who were less good players than myself, hopefully get them a bit better, and you could actually play a lot of good rackets without having to be at the very top level. But I used to, I immediately, having traveled around the different clubs in America, told all of my rackets playing friends in England, I said, you better come over to America. I said, your eyes are going to pop out of your head. These rackets weekends they have, unlike in those days, the English tournaments were played over a 2-week period. Yeah. And so it was very difficult when you were working to get, for myself or anyone else, to cross over the Atlantic and get your first match scheduled on a Tuesday and not play again till that Friday, then maybe the next week. At the haphazard time, it was totally unfeasible. Whereas the Americans, also having to travel certain distances between clubs, held all their tournaments over a 3 or 4 day period. Very intense competition and very intense living too, I might add, which was part of the amusement of playing rackets. So I said, immediately after I started to travel around the different clubs, said to my friends, I said, you better come over. You're really going to have a great time. And hopefully I think I was probably quite instrumental in getting a lot more people to cross the Atlantic both ways. Actually, the first time I set foot in North America was in the Expo tournament in 1967 in Montreal, which was an invitational tournament. Players from England, America, and obviously Canada, and we were there for a week or 10 days, playing rackets and visiting Expo and having a great time and beginning a lot of great friendships, where I first met David McClernand, who was by far and away the best player this side of the Atlantic in the last 40 years, 50 years. Therefore, all the clubs and all the clubs are very different over here. Although all the rackets playing clubs have rackets courts, but the membership is very different club to club. The feel and the atmosphere is quite different, although they all put on fantastic events. Yeah. But there's the racket club. Probably I think I can say without offending anyone that the greatest club, if not the greatest rackets club, if not club in the world, is the New York Racket and Tennis Club, in terms of being the only small building on Park Avenue never allowed to have anything higher than 4 stories surrounded, which makes it very unique, and it's the most beautiful club in every sense, as you know, Peter, as a member. In the 1970s, when I first came here, very, very formal. There was Clary Pell, really sort of, who was an older generation than much older than I was, 20 years older than me, was very much, it was his father, Mortimer and Pell, had been a famous rackets pair in America in the 1910s and 20s. And he was the son of old Mr. Pell. And he was a great believer in the old rules. Several of which include first of all, no women, he didn't allow women in to watch rackets matches, apart from the fact they weren't allowed in the racket club. Even for a rackets tournament, they might have been allowed in for the finals on Sunday, and that was it. Otherwise, they weren't allowed in. All the equipment had to be kept in the under the tin at the front of the court. So if you wanted a drink of water, you had to take some water and put it in a glass at the front of the court with spare rackets and another shirt. We needed to change the shirt in the game. Of course, it was ridiculous.
I had read an article, I guess it was one of the same articles where you were mentioned, but he was quoted as saying, once the door closes,
yes,
you're not allowed to come off the court until the match is finished.
That's right. Unless you had a very, very good reason. Yes.
Yeah,
you had
different way of looking at it.
Beg and appeal to the referee. So of course it was ridiculous because people were forever smashing a glass of water at the front, causing chaos. So that all changed, and I think the first tournament I went to from Chicago was in Detroit, and Detroit is in those days there were two clubs in Detroit, the University Club and the Racket Club. The University Club has subsequently, as you can understand, Detroit being a small town and having gone through some very hard times, was unable to survive, and that has just completely disappeared. It's been razed to the ground. But the Racket Club, which is over 100 years now, and I'm also belong to the Racket Club still there, is an absolute jewel. It has a rackets court, just what you want from a rackets club: a rackets court, a changing room, a dining room, and a bar, and that's it. I think they might have a squash court hidden away there somewhere too, but but it's a wonderful club with probably 100 members. It thrives and very sociable, and we had I remember my first tournament there in 1971. I was slightly surprised after dinner where one of the members said, well, now we're going to have some fun. So we all went off to an apartment where they'd arranged some ladies of the night to be there. Sort of 6 of us. That was all part of the game, as it were, part of the weekend. So when I went back to Chicago 2 weeks later, Chicago was hosting its rackets tournament, so which would have been actually the U.S. Open. So I said to the manager of the club, Ian Fletcher, who was an Englishman, who was always very formal, went around in a morning coat and a stick pin and everything else. And I said, look, I went to Detroit last weekend, and you ought to see the after dinner entertainment. It's quite spectacular. I think we ought to put on some kind of show ourselves. So he said, well, I can't really get involved. He said, you better talk to the barman. The barman called George, and I said, George, we're going to need 2 or 3 girls, to liven up the event after dinner. Oh, he said, no problem, sir. And so anyway, towards the end of the stag dinner, and of course all rackets tournaments in this country, always the format. I mean, there was a stag dinner on Thursday or Friday night, black tie stag dinner with speeches and everything else, which gave a great feeling of unity to the game, unlike tooling up to Queens and having a warm beer afterwards and going home after your match, which was the old way of playing rackets in England. This was quite the reverse. So 3/4 of the way through, right at the end of dinner, the manager comes up to me, he's tapping us, and he says, they're here. You said you'll have to bring them in the back door. They can't come in the front door. It was freezing cold. There's 2 feet of snow, driving snowstorm. I went downstairs, and these 3 hookers, 1 colored and 2 white, or the other way around. There were 3 of them. And they all had big fur coats and big hats on. So there's an entrance down the side of the club on Schiller Street. So I walked down the side of the street, with these girls on my arms. I'm in my dinner jacket. Unfortunately, there was a taxi load of women who'd been out to dinner, not attending the stag, coming down Schiller Street.
Oh boy.
Gave me a strange look. I got a few remarks the next day. We took him in through the bath department, brought him plunked him in the bath department, and then games of chance of backgammon and craps and everything else. And if you want a bit of money, you could go downstairs and have your fun. Anyway, that was my sort of entree into the first two clubs I went to, and having been to the Montreal Club in 1967, which again is very like Detroit. It's a entity unto itself. It has a rackets court and the other things that go with the rackets, a bar and a dining room and nice wood paneled room and everything. Quite unlike the racket club in Chicago. And I think my great friend and partner, Eddie Ullman, was very instrumental in getting hold of rackets from Clary Pell and loosening up rackets tournaments in New York, allowing women in and having proper stag dinners and people actually paying attention and supporting the game. Where else? Boston. Actually, now I don't know if any of you have been to Boston. It still survived thanks to Debbie Hamlin, a great friend of mine, who took, when I first went to Boston in 1971, again, it was a fully operational rackets club like Chicago, in that it had rooms, bathrooms, rooms, a proper drawing room, a bar, and a gym and a billiards room, and rackets and tennis. However, again, just showing you the difference between the clubs, the older members of the racket club in Boston never really paid attention. And this is a great lesson for all racket clubs, never paid attention to the next generation, and didn't have a junior committee, didn't really care who was joining the club. In fact, they probably disapproved of a lot of the people who were joining the club, and the dues were going up, so they dropped out, and the club fell into total disrepair, saved from bankruptcy by Debbie Hamlin single-handedly. And although now all the when I first was there in 71, when I stayed in the bedroom there with a bathroom en suite, there were 8 or 9 rooms. And as I said, it was a fully operational club. You went downstairs for breakfast and had lunch and dinner in the club if you wanted to. Now it is just literally the old locker room is gone. There's a new locker room on the ground floor, but the tennis court and the rackets court have survived. So the games have survived, but it's a totally different club than it was back in the 70s. Well, it's changed for the better in that it has survived. Where are the other ones? As Tuxedo, which is, of course, an extraordinary place. If you've been to Tuxedo, you know anything about the history of Tuxedo, it's totally unique. It was built by Mr. Lorillard back in the 1910s, I think, as a playground for his then millionaire friends, and he imported a lot of the stone from Spain. It's a very attractive. It's got 2 lakes and hills go up vertically almost all around the club, apart from one end where there's a golf course. But at one point, they had a horse racing track. They had around it, I think even car racing as well at one point, rackets and tennis. Skating in the winter, lawn tennis as well, the squash. It was the true sportsman's club, and was fantastic. Of course, the houses he built originally for his friends and encouraged them to build were enormous, and some of them having living in quarters for 20 or 30 servants. Of course, that died out after the war, and went through a period of not really doing very well at all, but has come back now with money from Wall Street. There are a couple of big houses, I think, that are still operational in terms of having a lot of living-in servants, but most of the houses are smaller or the bigger houses have been chopped up, but the place is thriving and has all these games, and again is a wonderful center for rackets and tennis. And then what have I left out? Philadelphia. And Philadelphia went through a very tough time. Just trying to think of the name of the pro who was really a tennis player.
Ed Knoll,
and I can't think of his name. It's stupid. Eddie Noel.
Yeah.
Noel, yes. But was it? It was before him. It was a pro before him. It was the old world tennis pro, and I remember. Actually, I went down and played. There were some younger players because the Rackets court was beautiful. It really hadn't had much play on it in years and years and years, and much more, a lot of play on the tennis court. But I put on an exhibition match before I played John Pren in 1981. But before Christmas, I went down there with my friend Randall Crawley, who came over, and because some members of the Racket Club in Philadelphia said, we'd really like to see a proper game of rackets, and would you put on an exhibition match? So I said I'd be delighted, and we went down, and they had a full gallery, and we really had a very good match, and I think appreciated it. I think it got rackets going. But I went into the pro shop. I remember there's a great reasoning for the lack of rackets. I went into the pro shop afterwards, and I said to the pro, I said, it's a shame. I said, it's a beautiful rackets court, And I said, do you stock any rackets? And he said, no, I don't stock any rackets because nobody plays. I thought to myself, well, I'm banging my head against a brick wall, right?
If you it's Jimmy Dunn, I think. Is it Jimmy Dunn who's the guy? Was it Jimmy Dunn? Is that who it was?
Yeah, Jimmy Dunn. Yes, Jimmy Dunn. Yeah. Right, exactly. Jimmy Dunn. He was a very nice man. But he said, I don't stock any rackets because nobody plays rackets. So that's the end of that. You can't argue against that. And
no.
But rackets has continued, and I don't think the word thrives, but it comes and goes, according to the membership.
Yeah.
But I'm just trying to think. Have I covered almost? I think that's covered nearly all the courts.
One of the questions that I wanted to ask you was, what court would you say would have been your favorite court to play on if you had to pick? I mean, obviously you picked Chicago for I think 4 or 5 out of the 6 challenges.
That's a good question because they're all very different.
They are.
Actually, just going back a bit, that was one of the assets of playing rackets at school, and it used to annoy everybody else who played team games because if you were playing in a rackets match, because the courts were all different, and there were only 6 of you, a junior pair and 2, a second and a first pair. So you were driven down by the rackets master and the pro to wherever you were going. But you always had to go before lunch in order to give all 3 pairs a chance to have a knock-up. So you didn't have to go to school that day. You went down, you left at sort of 9 or 10 o'clock. Time you got to, say, Eton or Harrow and had a lock-up. Then you had lunch, and then you had 3 matches. Then you had tea afterwards. Then you got home in time about 8 or 9 o'clock. Anyone playing any other game, they play in the afternoon, and they're back being prep. But so it was an asset to play rackets in rackets matches. I'm sorry, what was the question you asked me?
What was your favorite court to play on?
Favorite court? I like the Chicago court because I played there a lot. It's a very fast court, and it's a very true court. Actually, it's I think in this day and age, it's a criticism would be it's actually almost too fast. And I've watched some matches there. It's a little bit quicker than it really should be to have a good rackets match. But I liked the court when I played in it. The Racket Club in New York is to me the perfect court. When I was growing up, Queens was a beautiful court. The number 1 court as it was then, the only court at Queens, was a beautiful court, and a very true court to play on. But then I think it got too much play on it, obviously. But the Racket Club in New York is a first-rate court.
It is.
It's got all the right elements. It's that you can serve aces, but serving won't dominate. And it's a fast court, and it's up and down. Doesn't come up, grab the sidewall. Tuxedo, for instance, that grabs the sidewall.
Yeah,
it's quite difficult to take serve in Tuxedo. You have to come all the way into the middle of the court to take serve. The Boston court suffered a lot over the years. I think it's playing all right now, but they had a time
Very,
when
very slow now, and it doesn't really like it's almost impossible to actually roll the ball out on a serve. So you
Is
get
that right?
you
Yes.
get long
Yeah.
rallies now. It's almost like
Right.
it's very squashy.
But probably the Philadelphia courts is in
Court.
very good shape.
Yeah, it's
I mean,
rapid though. It's very, very fast.
Yeah, and Detroit. Detroit
is a good server's court there. That's for sure.
The Montreal court, I think, is very difficult to play on because when in 1967 it was the original court, and then the city required them to move the front wall and therefore the back wall back 2 feet. They needed it for a road going past. It was terribly unfortunate, really, because in all honesty, I think the court never really recovered. The back wall was moved back, say, a yard or something like that, but there's a slight crease that runs along, and the speed, and which actually I think, if you look at it, is dropped 1/8 of an inch or something, so marginally lower than the rest of the court, and it's a different speed at the back of the court. It's very difficult to take serve.
It's hard. It's very hard to return serve there. I agree. That's what, when we were going over the courts, that was the court that I picked for myself as probably having the hardest time to return on, just because it's not the same.
Yes, it's a shame because they've never been able to correct that. I'm not sure they've ever really tried to. They probably could nowadays, but at some expense. But it's a beautiful court with a really lovely gallery and everything.
Yeah.
Of course, they have to move the gallery back a bit too. But I mean, the game is thriving in a lot of courts over here, and of course, the schoolboy game I know is thriving in England, and it's exciting to see. Of course, I don't see much of it in Florida, but I did. One side note, as after I moved down to Florida, my old friend Tom Pugh, who was I played with him in the I think the only time I played in the British Open doubles. I played with him in 1969, I think, something like that, and we got to the semi-final. He was a very great competitor and a very good friend of mine, and he loved to come to Chicago, to Florida. And when I moved down to Florida in 1982, he'd already been coming down here every winter because he loved the high lie, and I went to the high line with him the first year. I mean, it's great fun. I mean, it's just a very an entertaining game to watch.
Did you guys bet on it? Did you bet on the high lie? I know that in Miami there was a big betting situation going on there.
It's all betting. It's all, in a sense, it's all numbers. But the skill of these players is fantastic. Anyway. So there's an ad in the paper that Tom sees when he's down here one year that says, highlight the world's fastest ball game. So Tom, being very argumentative, went to the owner of the highlight, and he said, yeah, absolute nonsense. He said, Rackets is much faster. And he said, and I'll prove it. So he got John Pren, myself, and Andrew Milne. And he was the fourth, and we were going to put on an exhibition of rackets in the highlight court. It's called a fronton, and there was a fronton right here in West Palm.
Fronton in Mexico, yeah.
Yeah, it's subsequently fallen into disrepair many years ago, but anyway. So and of course it's a betting game. So if you're going to participate in anything on the court, you have to be locked up in the changing room with all these, these Spanish-speaking people, the highlight players. So anyway, of course, the highlight court is 90 feet long, and there's no third wall.
Yep.
But interestingly, the floor and the walls, the front wall and the side wall and the back wall, are all made of granite. And if you ever actually want, they're identical to a perfect rackets court.
Yeah.
If you ever wanted to build another rackets court and had them built of granite, wouldn't screw around with putting on plaster, just put blocks of granite down. But anyway, we could only to manufacture a game. I mean, there's probably 1,000 people out in the stands, right? They billed us as putting on a game of rackets. Of course, minus the third wall, on the fourth wall, somewhere, 20 yards behind you, 20 feet behind you. John and I hit the ball around the front of the court, just like a racket court, the speed of the ball and everything else. And we had a few sort of short rallies. Yeah. And Andrew Milne was at the back, and Tom Pugh's standing with the microphone at the side. And so anyway, the highlight players come on the court and are sort of interested to see what's going on. So we offered them a racket, see if they could do it. Because it's like giving Jack Nicklaus a tennis racket. They couldn't do it at all. Because the highlight is with a cesta, and you do it underneath it's only on your left side, and you do it underneath, you catch it on like this on the left side, and then throw it underhand. So the crowd were beginning to sort of laugh at them, so they gave us a cesta. So John and I tried to, actually, we did better than they did with a racket. So that's when they ushered us off the court. They'd had enough. But so we did that up here, and also down in Miami at the Highlight, which was great fun. It's the only place where rackets is played. I have a question for you. You probably know this because you're up in the rackets world. Is the court in Gibraltar still operating?
Not as far as I know. No. I mean, the only court that's out of use but still like existing as like in the US or the UK, that obviously Hailing Island being one of them, is the court in Lakewood. So they obviously the real tennis court.
I've never been to the Lakewood one. That was built by Jay Gould.
It was. So the court is actually, the tennis court is a beautiful tennis court. The penthouse is a little bit lower because I guess Jay Gould is a shorter guy. Right. They play on it.
Oh, is that right? He was shorter. So
yeah. If you hit a railroad there, is that right? You can spin the railroad serve back into the winning gallery quite easily. But the rackets court is directly behind the tennis court. They've painted white, and they've run like an HVAC duct through the middle of the court because they use it as I guess some sort of student lounge or something. But there's been talks with NARA about reconverting the court back to a rackets court and using it. And I believe when in 2019 or 2018, the NARA reps had contacted them about that. So there's ongoing discussions about trying to convert that court back. Well, that brings me to a question that I wanted to ask you.
I'm not sure how you get people to join and play or whatever, but it's don't want to see another rackets court. There was another rackets court actually when I first went to Chicago in the University Club downtown.
That was where they did the Manhattan Project, right? Or no, that was at the University of Chicago.
I don't know. I think
there was another court at the University.
This is the University Club, not the university itself. Or that's where rackets was reputedly. The rackets court was used to where they built the nuclear bomb.
Yes,
but they experimented with it. But the University Club had a court which I played on, and we used to play tournaments there in the 70s, and was perfectly good. I sometimes used to play there at lunchtime. They had a very nice English professional called Joe Barnett, who was a lovely old man. And he traveled around and strung all our rackets and did that sort of stuff. But funny you should say that, but about Lakewood having a smaller penthouse. I played real tennis when I first, when I went to Oxford. I learned the game from Peter Dawes, who went on to be at Hailing Island. And the court at Oxford actually is a slightly smaller court and a slightly lower penthouse than a standard real tennis court. Because the thing that I find fascinating about real tennis is obviously the origins of real tennis are in a courtyard in France. I mean, obviously a friend had a courtyard and he and his friend strung a piece of string or whatever it was across, and they got a wooden bat and bound up some cloth and whacked it over the net, and they called the stable entrances of the guys. That's fine, right? What I'd like to know is who built the second court?
That's a good question. I'm sure that they must have just done it in different monasteries or something.
Who would be eccentric and mad enough to copy his friend's courtyard and put in all the stable doors and the kink of the temple? Who on earth would do that? obviously someone completely eccentric.
Crazy person. Yeah, that's a good
But
point, actually. So one of the questions that a lot of people were wondering, and obviously your time as world champion as a rackets player bridged the gap obviously from Jeffrey Atkins all the way to
right.
John Moran and Willie Boone. Who do you think was your toughest opponent during your career?
Well, John Pren. John Pren was my toughest opponent, who I eventually lost to, although I beat him in New York, I lost him in London. But I felt I always had the measure of Willie Boone, and I certainly I lost once to Howard Angus, but basically I could beat Howard. He was more of a tennis player than a rackets player. And the next generation was beyond me. I always thought that actually I would have enjoyed playing against James Mayle if I was playing at my best, because I always thought that actually that both Boone and Pren didn't play James Mayle the right way. If I had been playing, Boone and Pren both hit the ball extremely hard. Mm-hmm. There was the modern game of rackets in those days. If I was playing James Mayle, I would have taken a lot of pace off the ball. I would have cut the ball a lot and hit it short, because he's being with two-handed. I think in the end, a two-hander would tend to hit the ball up rather than down, and you get a lot off the back wall that you might be able to kill. I would have been interested to have played him at my best, but John Pren was the best player I played against. He had everything. Yes.
Would you say that he was the best player? I mean, I assume that you've seen Stout play at some point or another in a professional match, either in a world championship or something like that. James Stout, you've seen him play?
I have indeed seen James Stout. I think he's probably James Mayle may disagree with him, but I think Stout has got it or has had it all. I mean, he's got all the shots and the strength and the fitness and everything. That he's the consummate rackets player. Yes.
Yeah. Do you think that his game, in terms of the best player that you've ever seen, would you think that James is at the top of that list? Obviously, yourself included in the list.
No, Stout would be at the top of the list. Yes, I think. I mean, not that I've ever been on a court with him, but watching him from above, so to speak. But yeah, definitely.
Interesting. One of the other things that people were interested to know was what your opinion on the one serve versus the two serve rule is. When you went to America, obviously it was presumably the first time that you had dealt with that. Was it a bit of an adjustment when you came over to Chicago and had to deal with that? And which did you prefer?
Yes, I mean, personally, you adjust to the one serve pretty quickly because you serve false. Yeah. John Pren and I disagree on this, actually. I mean, we've talked about it a lot. There's been a lot of discussion over the years. He feels being more of a traditionalist. He believes in the two serve game. I think the game will be much better in the UK, especially for schoolboys. There's some, you get a brutish schoolboy who's a thug at 16 years old, who can beat the nonsense out of somebody else just who serves harder.
Yeah.
And having two serves doesn't teach you the skill of serving.
Yeah.
Peter Gray used to take me in the court, and he put a racket down on the side wall, in the neck, and he'd say, "You've got to hit that racket right at the where it joins where I put it against the wall." I mean, he was a great believer in being able to cut the ball down to a length.
Yeah.
Rather than just getting up and whacking it. And I think a one serve rule would, it seems to work perfectly well over here, and everybody comes over who plays in the championship and plays a one serve rule. It doesn't seem to affect them at all.
Yep.
I mean, it's not like they say, "Oh God, with two serves I've beaten you."
Yeah.
But I think it teaches you as a schoolboy, you'd be much better served to have schoolboys learn how to serve with, especially with the speed of the game now, to be able to serve properly with one serve. That's my opinion, but
I happen to agree with you. I think the one serve makes for a better game too, because there's more rallying typically because they're less aggressive.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
I think it makes it a fairer game,
Yeah.
especially at a younger level. Anyway, but
one of
but
the
so
other
be it.
questions that people wanted to know from you was, obviously you were close with Eddie Ullman. Do you have any specific recollections or fond memories or stories that you could share about your friendship with Eddie Ullman?
Of Eddie, he was a wonderful sort of a swashbuckling amateur player, and he had a great love of the game, and he was great fun to play with. He was a wonderful after dinner speaker. Everybody wanted to hear him. He traveled around all the time, and he wasn't the greatest rackets player. He got himself into quite to be a much better than competent rackets player. He was playing the forehand court, and I played the backhand court. And we won several competitions together against some reasonably good players. The only one we were playing, I think, in Boston in the final. I don't know what, maybe the amateur, I don't know what it was. And we were playing against Andrew and Randall Crawley, who were great friends of mine growing up. Andrew was a godfather of one of my children. We were just lifelong friends, and their death was tragic to me. But we're playing against the Corleys, who were very contentious themselves. I mean, they were Randall's very sort of contentious person. But we played against them, and we hit the ball obviously as much as we could initially to Andrew, who played an absolute blinder. For the first 10 or 12 balls that came his way, he hit them absolutely perfectly. I mean, and then one came to finally one came to Andrew, who missed the ball, and Randall had a slight stutter. He said, "Oh, come on, Andrew." They almost had a fisticuff on court. Absolutely one. I said, "This is how we play them. Play them all at Andrew. Sooner or later he misses one, and then Randall loses his temper." But actually, we ended up. I think we lost 3-2 to them. It was slightly annoying. We should have won that match. But
Norm Madison actually emailed me specifically about that match today, mentioning that was one of the best doubles matches that he had ever watched. And
is that right?
I guess he had mentioned that there was only like 5 people in the gallery because people had left. And he said it was an absolute shame that people didn't get to watch that match. It was such a great quality match.
Right. Well, rackets sometimes is 5, sometimes is 20, sometimes there are none.
Yeah, I know. I said we were talking last week with Tom Billings, and he asked what was the best I've ever played and what was the best I've ever seen played. And I said most of the best rackets I've ever played, and for sure the best rackets I've ever seen played, has all been in practice with James Stout. I mean, the guy, people rarely get to watch him play at his best because he's so rarely actually at tournaments. And then you're not pushing him. The best I've ever seen like anyone play is 2-on-1, me and Larkin versus Stout, because the guy, actually pushing him and ways.
I think Stout's eye-hand coordination was particularly good, in that he more than anyone else, I always thought, whenever I saw him play, which was not a lot, but he had the ability to take the ball off the sidewall.
Yeah.
Full toss off the sidewall.
Yep.
I mean, he, rather than before it hit the floor, he'd take it off the sidewall. That requires great eye-hand coordination, which he did repeatedly. He had a terrific skill. He was very, very good.
Yeah, his reading of the ball on the court is exceptional. I had a couple of more questions before we go.
Right.
You had mentioned playing John Pren, and I had read the article. I guess it was written in the middle of your match when you'd won in New York 4-2.
Right.
And then you'd gone over to the UK and lost to him, and I guess it was Queens at 4-0. What the first part of the question was, what is your most satisfying or best win? And then conversely, what did you feel was your most devastating and toughest loss?
Actually, probably my best win was beating Willie Boone 4-0 in the first leg in 1979, because he was by far and away the best next generation. And you always aim to beat your next generation of any sport.
Yeah.
So beating him and winning then One Love in London was great. And then having Madame Roederer present the case of Cristal. So good. Anyway, the first leg I played against John Prenn in New York, I think was probably the best rackets match I played, because I think I was 2-1 down in games and won the next 3. I think I'm right in saying, but that was a very, very good match. And you could ask, I mean, Charlie Hugh Williams would verify that. Unfortunately, and this is, I'm not going to make any excuse really, but unfortunately it was played, the 2 legs were played at the beginning of December. And when I got to England, it was a freak cold spell. If you look it up, it was abnormally cold. There was snow on the ground. And my parents lived near Tilford, and I was staying with them in the country. And I was out running on just sort of loosening up and training on Hankney, and I pulled a thigh muscle in I can't remember which leg, but that was like on the Tuesday, so I had 4 days to recover. And in the beginning, it was a very cold day again at Queen's, and I didn't take my sweat pants off. If you look back, instead of wearing white socks, I was wearing white sweatpants. Mm-hmm. The first 2 or 3 games, because I reckoned that I had to actually get into the match very carefully and make sure I didn't pull it badly. Yep. And actually, I did warm up. I did play better, and interestingly, there was a critical point in the match. He was leading 2-1, and I think I was like 13-8 up. 2-1 down, but I'm playing better. If I get into the game, I get to be 2-all, and I've won 4-2 in New York. It's a different match, right? Yeah. I think that's right. I think that was the score, 2-1, because I think he beat me 4-1 in London. But I hit a shot, and very typical John, because he's a lawn tennis player. The ball landed in the middle of the court, and he's behind me. He throws himself forward and reaches out with his racket, and the ball hits the racket, and it's like everything's in slow motion for me at that point. The ball arches from the front wall, arches very slow. This is like, it's like coming, it's going to be chased half a yard. Oh yeah, arches very high under the lights all the way back, and I've got about 5 minutes to turn around and think about what to do with it. Yep. And in the end, I'm backed up against the back wall, and I've got no shot. And basically, I've made a winner, right? Yeah. But, and that really lost me the match, I think. Yeah. Perversely, when I first beat Howard Angus, and he'd beaten me 4-1 in London, and the first game in Chicago was like 13-all set 3, I think. I can't remember exactly, but it was he didn't have a match point. So it was a very close situation, and I hit a serve and he hit a shot that clipped the very top of the telltale, and basically that's what lost him the championship. Won it for me, and I lost in a perverse way, a few years later. So that's I think my match against Prenn in New York was the best match I ever played, I think. Charlie Hugh Williams was there. He might verify that one way or the other. But
from everything I've
read,
how
the Rovians stick together or not.
From everything I've read, it sounds like that was a fantastic match and a great challenge.
It was a good. It was a good match. Yes, it was a very good match. Yeah.
So you were the second all-time most challenges. I had read that I believe it was James Mayle played 7 challenges. You played 6. So when Jeffrey retired, you had beaten Howard 5-4, lost to Howard, won it back.
I grew up with Jeffrey Atkins won in 1953, and because of the war, there was actually. And by the way, Jeffrey won, I think if you look it up, he came to Chicago in 53, and I think he went back to London and won the British Open tennis in court tennis, real tennis, in 1954. And James Deere at that point was probably the best champion of probably certainly the best tennis player, if not best rackets player, until Jeffrey won.
Yep.
But Jeffrey he never played tennis again because he came back to Chicago where there was no tennis court. And I would maintain that gap where there weren't a lot of other tennis or rackets players around for Jeffrey's prime years, he would have been world champion at tennis as well. He was a very, very good court tennis player, because I did see him play in New York, I guess, for amusement. But he could do anything. He was a very good athlete. But from 53 until 72, when I played Howard, there had only ever been 2 challenge matches, and that's 4 legs, because Charles Swallow challenged twice, I think. I think I'm right in saying he challenged twice. So that when I beat Howard in 72, and obviously it was a very close situation. I said to him immediately, if you want to challenge again, I'll take a challenge. I said, I think it's good for the game and I want to do it.
Right.
And unfortunately I got hit in the eye in Boston the week before the first leg against Howard. And it wasn't his fault, it wasn't my fault, it was just a pure accident. He overswung and caught my eye in the final of what was then the amateur. And I had, of course, I put my hand up to my eye. Everyone in the gallery, it was the finals, everybody was there. I thought I was going to come down with my eye in my hand, but it was bleeding profusely. And I had to have 7 stitches in it. And I could have put the match off, but Howard was over here and blah, blah, blah. So I went ahead and I lost, which was unfortunate, but I thought it was the right thing to do. And then actually, I think I beat Howard for the British Open title to give me the right to challenge him back. And after that, I beat him quite easily.
Yeah.
Anyway, well, I suppose Howard's a little bit older than I am, so it must be Jeffrey Atkins who's the oldest world champion. Howard is next, then there's myself, then probably Pren, then Boone, then Pren.
Yep.
And then
Neil,
Foster
and stuff. Yeah. I think right. Neil is probably right around. I think Neil and Mal are like the same, born the same year.
Yes,
like 1 year
about
old.
the same age. Right.
We actually have Howard lined up to speak next week, which we're very excited for. I want to ask you one last question before we ended. When did you end up ultimately put your racket down and stop playing the game? And after you sort of retired, did you really miss the game, and do you still miss the game?
I did when I moved to Florida after I'd lost it to John. If I'd beaten John, I think I would have retired. I would have retired anyway, actually. But I moved to Florida because my first son was born in 1981. He was 40 last week, so he was born in 1981, and we moved we didn't want to bring our children up in New York. So we moved down to Florida in 1982. But then I went back and played in various different tournaments back in the 80s. And maybe as long as, I think I played in the first Walsh Cup in New York. I don't know what year, maybe the beginning of the 90s. And then the last time I played rackets, which will probably be the last time, I did actually play a doubles when I say exhibition, Eddie and I got in the court when he was very ill with cancer. We got in the court at Tuxedo one weekend, and there was something going on, so there were people watching that. That was back in 2013, I would think, 12 or 13. And I did go. The Racket Club in Chicago very kindly gave me a dinner, which was very kind of them. About 3 years ago now, and I agreed to play with Davis Anderson in the doubles, and I hadn't played any rackets in many years. So in the middle of the first game, everything was going all right. It wasn't a very high standard. I was playing at a very low standard. But I pulled a muscle in my, just because I was unused to it, right in my forearm.
Yep.
So, and I said to Davis, I said, Davis, I can't go on because I can't serve. I literally can't do anything. I have no strength left. So that was a rather a pathetic ending, right? But I don't think I'll be making another entry into a rackets court again. But thank you very much for asking me to talk to you.
Absolutely. We really appreciate your time, and it was really interesting to hear.
Not a bit.
All your
And
stories.
if you need to fill in any gaps, let me know, and I'll tell you who to talk to. Right. Okay.
We really appreciate it. Next week we've got Howard Angus lined up, and
we'll give Howard my best. Yeah.
I will do.
Yep. All right.
Okay. Take care.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thanks.